They hurt you and then walked away as if you never mattered, as if your presence in their life was a passing shadow, easily forgotten. They acted like your pain was invisible, your love disposable, something that could be discarded without a second thought. And the most haunting part, they didn't even flinch, not when your heart broke, not when your world shifted, not when your soul trembled under the weight of betrayal, but that moment when your spirit fractured silently into 1,000 shards, where your transformation truly began. You didn't know it then. It felt more like the end of everything than the beginning of anything. But deep within the ruins of your heartbreak, something sacred was awakening, something stronger than the pain, stronger than the betrayal. A quiet, fierce resilience began to rise. You kept going over it in your mind. The memories, the laughter, the promises that now taste like ash. You tried to make sense of it. How could someone look you in the eyes, receive your love so fully, and then treat you like you were nothing more than a page they turned without regret? You gave them something, real vulnerability, your truth, your open heart. You gave them the kind of love that has the power to restore, to renew, to heal. But they weren't interested in healing. They weren't looking for something genuine. They were looking for control, for dominance, for someone who would play by their unspoken rules and never shine too brightly. They hurt you because your light revealed what they tried to keep hidden. This truth sounds simple, even poetic, but its depth can dismantle every lie they told you about your worth. You must understand this. People who are emotionally broken, narcissistic, or manipulative are not driven by love. They are driven by fear. Fear of being truly seen, fear of being known, fear of facing the emotional wounds they've spent a lifetime running from. And when someone like you enters their world, someone sincere, emotionally present, and full of heart, it becomes unbearable because your very existence becomes a mirror that reflects everything they have tried to bury, every wound, every lie, every part of themselves they refuse to confront. You didn't cause their darkness, but your presence illuminated it. And for someone who survives by wearing masks, your light was a threat. You didn't play games. You didn't manipulate. You didn't wear a false face. You showed up fully with honesty and care. And in doing so, you made them feel something they weren't ready for. See, and to someone who builds their entire identity on lies, projections, and ego, being seen is terrifying. They didn't flinch because they're numb, not healed, just disconnected. And they walked away not because you weren't enough, but because you were far too real for their carefully constructed illusion. And that is the beginning not of your end, but of your rise. They walked away as if nothing happened, as if your tears meant nothing, as if your love had no weight, no substance, no value. And perhaps the most confusing part was this. You weren't attacking them. You weren't tearing them down. You were simply showing up as yourself fully, truthfully, vulnerably. But even that was too much, because the purity of your love exposed their pain. Your sincerity made their masks feel heavy. Your consistency made their instability obvious. And your depth made their shallow intentions unbearable. Not because you inflicted harm, but because your light revealed what they were trying to hide. Not just from you, but from themselves. You reminded them of everything they were not. When people carry emotional wounds they refuse to heal, they often become hostile to anything that resembles healing. Not because healing is harmful, but because healing requires truth, and truth requires vulnerability. It requires self-awareness. And for someone who has built their life around emotional walls, that kind of openness feels like a threat. So instead of leaning into your warmth, they tried to destroy it. Instead of nurturing your love, they played with it. They couldn't accept the nourishment your heart offered, because to receive it, they would have to admit how malnourished their soul truly was. And that's a truth they couldn't sit with. You didn't confuse them. That's important to remember. They knew exactly what your love meant. They saw the value. They felt the care. But that clarity is exactly what made them run, because accepting your love would require them to confront a devastating question. Why have I never believed I deserved this? And that question leads to places they weren't ready to go: childhood wounds, buried shame, guilt, and long-avoided truths. So they hurt you, not because you were too much, but because you were everything they were too afraid to be. Your strength, your empathy, your transparency became a mirror, and that mirror didn't lie. It reflected back the parts of them they had long silenced, parts covered by ego, bravado, charm, or manipulation. And you didn't play along. You didn't join the performance. You asked for something real, something steady, something honest. And that made you dangerous. You became a threat without ever intending to. A threat to their illusions, a threat to their control, a threat to the identity they wore like armor. And after hurting you, after discarding you, they acted like nothing ever happened. Why? Because acknowledging your pain would require guilt. It would require shame. It would demand they look in the mirror and see the damage they caused. And that kind of reckoning only happens in people who have the courage to self-reflect. They don't avoid the truth because they're innocent. They avoid it because they are terrified of it. It was never about you. It was always about what you symbolized. You symbolized love. You symbolized truth. You symbolized transparency and healing and the very things they didn't know how to receive, things they didn't believe they were worthy of. So rather than rising to meet your frequency, they tried to drag you down to theirs. And when that didn't work, they tried to twist the narrative. They rewrote the story to make you question your own worth. But deep down, they always knew. They knew what you were. They saw it from the beginning. That's why they were drawn to you. And that's why they tried to dim your light when it got too bright. Because it reminded them of everything they had buried inside. All the emotions they've repressed. Or the healing they've avoided. So if you've survived their silence, their indifference, their gaslighting here, this now, you were not rejected because you were lacking. You were rejected because your presence was too expansive for someone. Still living in emotional confinement, the pain you felt was not a reflection of your flaws. It was a reflection of their fears and the silence after the storm. That wasn't peace. That was avoidance. That was escape. That was the echo of a soul too afraid to face what they had broken. But you faced it. You're still standing. And that makes you powerful beyond measure. They didn't hurt you because you were weak. They hurt you because you were powerful in a way they couldn't control. Your light, your presence, your authenticity, it was disarming. Not to people who are healed and whole, but to those who rely on illusion, performance, and emotional manipulation to maintain their false sense of self. And no matter how much they pretend like nothing happened, no matter how silent they remain, your light has already done its work. It exposed what was hidden. It brought clarity to the chaos. It revealed truth where there was deception. It cracked open the illusion they had spent years maintaining. One day, that same light, your light, will lead you to someone who is not afraid of it. Someone who sees it and says, I'm ready. I won't run from your truth. I will meet it with mine. But until that day, never stop being who you are. Never shrink yourself to make someone else more comfortable. Let your light shine even brighter. Let it bring divinity into dark places. Let it break false realities and usher in healing. Even if the one it exposed never admits what you showed them, their denial is not innocence, it's self-protection. It's the last defense of a fragile ego, terrified of being seen. When someone deeply wounds you and then acts as if nothing happened, it doesn't just hurt and erase it. It leaves you standing in the wreckage of something that was real for you, while they continue walking as if they've stepped out of a movie scene they were never really part of. You start to question everything. Was it all fake? Did they ever care? Was I that easy to forget? But you must understand, their ability to move on quickly isn't strength. It's not clarity. It's not peace. It's emotional avoidance. It's suppression, not healing. It's silence, not serenity. They deny the reality of your pain because to accept it would mean they have to confront their own actions. And the truth is, they're not emotionally equipped to do that. They have built their entire emotional world on defense mechanisms: repression, blame shifting, rationalization, denial. Walls so thick they can't even hear themselves think truthfully. Many people who hurt others without remorse do so because they've built identities that cannot hold the weight of guilt or accountability. They don't feel safe enough within themselves to admit fault. If they did, they would have to feel the shame they've been running from their entire lives. They would have to acknowledge not only what they did to you, but the parts of themselves. They've long ignored their fears, their wounds, their failures, and so they do the easier thing. They pretend. They rewrite the story. They paint you as too sensitive, too emotional, or too dramatic. They downplay the harm. They minimize the betrayal. They turn the narrative inside out so they can keep living behind the emotional walls they've constructed. But this isn't innocence. This is survival. This is ego. Doing what ego does best, protecting itself at all costs. You cannot expect someone who is emotionally disconnected from themselves to connect with your pain. You cannot expect someone who avoids their own feelings to sit with the depth of yours. And you cannot wait for closure from someone who never learned how to hold truth without turning it into a weapon. Closure in these situations does not come from them. It comes from you. From your decision to stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. From your choice to no longer beg for validation from someone incapable of giving it. From the holy moment you stop waiting for an apology and instead begin the sacred work of healing yourself. The reality is they're not as unaffected as they seem. That cool indifference, that emotional detachment, it's not peace, it's chaos in disguise. It's repressed guilt, buried shame, and a long line of truths they've never had the courage to face. Inside, there is a war they refuse to fight, a war they silence with distraction, with delusion, with control. They didn't forget what they did to you. They're just too afraid to face it, because to truly acknowledge the damage would mean admitting they were the one who caused it. So they stay quiet, they avoid, they smile in public, they move on to the next person, the next illusion, the next distraction. But the silence they leave behind does not erase the truth you lived through. You must stop expecting accountability from someone who lives in emotional exile. And you must remember this. Your pain is valid even if they pretend it isn't real, even if they call it an exaggeration, even if they deny everything. Your body remembers the sleepless nights. Your soul remembers the confusion. Your heart remembers the betrayal. That is truth. That is evident. And you have every right to honor it. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not weak. You are awake. Let them run from the truth. But you walk in it. You rise in it. And one day, that truth will no longer ache. It will set you free. They act like nothing ever happened. They smile. They laugh. They move on. But don't be fooled. None of that is proof they didn't hurt you. It's only evidence that they are running from the truth, from accountability, from themselves. They are not at peace. They are hiding from the wreckage they created and pretending it never existed. You were too real for their pretend world. Your honesty, your love, your vulnerability had disrupted the fragile illusion they live in. You weren't the problem. You were the mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to those who don't want to see what's broken. Don't confuse their silence with strength. Don't mistake their indifference for peace. What you see on the outside is not the whole truth. What looks like emotional detachment is often emotional chaos disguised. They've learned to bury the guilt, numb the discomfort, and silence their conscience, but silence isn't peace. It's paralysis. It's avoidance. It's the inability to face the truth. And that's the tragedy of it all. You were ready to talk it through, to understand, to heal together, but they couldn't go there. Because healing requires honesty, and honesty demands you look at yourself without flinching. They couldn't face what they did to you because they've never faced what was done to them. And so the cycle continues. They project, they deflect, they run. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. Because you made them feel, and feeling is terrifying when your identity depends on not feeling anything at all. Let go of the illusion that their denial means they're right. Let go of the hope that one day they'll wake up and finally say, I'm sorry. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But your healing cannot depend on their awakening. Your truth does not need their permission. Your pain is not invalid just because they're pretending it never happened. When someone deeply wounds you and then shows no guilt, no remorse, no regret, it can feel like your entire reality is collapsing. You start to second guess yourself. You ask, was I too sensitive? Did I overreact? You begin to shrink your truth to fit their silence. But silence is not evidence that nothing happened. It's often the mask people wear when they're too afraid to face what they've done. Their reaction, or lack of it, does not define the reality of your experience. Your pain isn't measured by their ability to feel it. It's measured by what it cost you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, what it stole from your peace, what it shattered in your heart, what it disrupted in your sense of self. And that matters. It always mattered. When someone you love deeply turns cold, distant, detached, it's not just a betrayal that breaks you, it's the aftermath. The way they move on like you never existed. The way they rewrite the story to erase their responsibility. The way they dismiss your suffering to protect their own image. But just because they didn't acknowledge your pain doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did. It was real. It mattered. You cannot seek validation from the one who broke you. That's like asking the fire to unburn you. They don't have the tools, the maturity, or the courage to hold your truth. And that's not your fault. That's not your burden. Your tears weren't wasted. Your heartbreak wasn't an overreaction. Your breakdowns were sacred expressions of a soul that had reached its limit. You don't need their guilt to confirm your truth. Pain doesn't require permission to be real. If it hurt, it's valid. If it changed you, it's valid. If it made you question everything, it's valid. Don't fall into the trap of gaslighting yourself just because they refuse to speak about it. Silence, indifference, and avoidance, these are not signs of innocence. They are the tools of emotional evasion. They are how people erase the truth while watching you suffer. But no matter what they say or do now, they cannot erase what you went through. You lived it. You survived it. And you have every right to heal from it on your terms, in your truth, without their validation. You lived it. You felt it in your body, in your chest, in your bones. It haunted your spirit. It woke you up in the middle of the night with a pain you couldn't name but couldn't ignore. It made you question everything you're worth, your judgment, your ability to ever feel safe again. It shattered your trust in people, in love, in what you thought was real. And all of that, it's real. That pain is real. And you have every right to feel it, to grieve it, to speak it, even if they pretend it never happened, even if they never say your name again, even if they move on like you never mattered. What you need to hold on to is this. Your pain is a message, not a mistake. It is not something to hide or be ashamed of. It's the evidence of your sincerity, your capacity to love, your willingness to show up fully. It proves that you were real in a situation that was fake, that you offered your heart in a world full of masks, that you stayed soft in a place that tried to harden you. The fact that they didn't feel anything doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you whole. It means you felt instead of numbed. You cared instead of calculated. You loved instead of played games. And while they may walk away untouched, unaffected, unmoved, you will rise healed. Because your healing does not require their remorse. Your peace does not depend on their apology. Your breakthrough is not built on their awakening. What happened? Happened. It broke something open inside of you. Yes, but it also birthed something powerful. It left a scar. Yes, but it also gave you wisdom, depth, and spiritual strength. And that wisdom will carry you farther than the silence they left behind ever could. You were too real for someone who lived in pretend. That truth, as heavy as it feels right now, is the very key to your freedom. The pain you felt wasn't because you weren't enough. It's because you were more than they could handle. You brought your full self to someone who only knew how to bring fragments. You spoke truth to someone who lived in illusion. You offered loyalty to someone who had already planned their exit. You anchored yourself in love while they floated from face to face, mask to mask. And if you're wondering why it felt so one-sided, it's because it was. You weren't just fighting for love. You were fighting for truth, for something sacred, something God ordained. You didn't step into that relationship lightly. You put your spirit on the line. You were led by love, empowered by faith, fueled by divine intention. That's why the pain cut so deep. That's why it felt like betrayal, not just heartbreak, because you were in it with your whole soul, and they were only ever halfway there, holding back the parts they never intended to share. People who live behind masks don't want to be seen. They've built identities like fortresses to protect themselves from ever being known. Their charm is strategic, their affection is calculated, their attention is conditional. They offer enough to pull you in, but never enough to stay real. And then someone like you enters their life. Someone who speaks from the soul, who listens with the heart, who brings light to every dark corner. They've tried to keep hidden dot at first. They're drawn to your light. They crave your purity, your peace, your presence. But soon, your authenticity begins to expose their pretense. Your truth begins to unravel their performance. Your consistency becomes a mirror they can no longer avoid. And that's when the pushback begins. That's when they ghost you, devalue you, dismiss your pain. Not because you were wrong, but because you were too right. You touched a part of them they've spent their entire life avoiding. You triggered a healing they were never ready to face. So stop looking for closure from the unhealed. Stop begging broken people to acknowledge the damage they refuse to see. Stop waiting for someone who's emotionally unavailable to finally become emotionally honest. Your healing is not on hold. Your story isn't paused. Your soul does not need their validation. The Lord saw it all, and heaven keeps better records than people do. You are not here to chase apologies. You are here to reclaim your power, to gather your broken pieces, hold them in God's hands, and rise with a wisdom forged in fire. You were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were never too emotional. You were simply too real for a world built on pretend. They were drawn to your energy, your warmth, your purity. Something about your spirit disarmed them. Something about your presence made them feel seen. And for a while, that felt like love to them. But it wasn't love they were drawn to. It was light. It was safety. It was the rare feeling of being accepted by someone who didn't ask for anything but the truth in return. But soon, that same purity became too much because it started to expose the lies they'd built their identity around. The false self they wore like armor began to crack under the weight of your sincerity. You never threatened them with control, manipulation, or demands. You threatened them with truth. And for someone who spent their life pretending, truth is the ultimate danger. When someone is used to performing, used to wearing masks, using charm as a weapon, affection as currency, they fear real connection. Not because they don't want it deep down, but because they don't know how to sustain it without being seen. And to them, being seen feels like death, because beneath that mask is a self they don't even know how to face. You didn't ask for anything impossible. You asked for honesty, for presence, for effort. But even those simple, sacred things were too much because they required vulnerability, and vulnerability is something they've learned to avoid at all costs. So they performed. They acted like they were capable of deep love. They spoke words that sounded right. They wore a smile that looked sincere. They gave you just enough to keep you guessing, enough to keep you hoping, enough to keep you coming back for the version of them they pretended to be. But one day you realized it was all a performance. They never truly intended to meet you where you stood wholehearted and wide open. They admired your loyalty, your light, your unwavering love, but they had no intention of returning it, because giving you that would mean stepping out of the illusion they lived in. It would mean confronting themselves, and that was something they were never ready to do. You were too real for them, and deep down they knew it. They knew they couldn't fake it forever. They knew you'd eventually see behind the mask. That's why they started to pull away. That's why they began to devalue you, to discard you. Not because you were wrong, not because you weren't enough, but because you saw too much. You saw through their charm. You noticed the inconsistencies. You asked the questions they didn't want to answer. You named the dysfunction they wanted to keep buried. And for someone who survives by pretending, being seen as the ultimate fear, you didn't fail. You didn't push too hard. You didn't ask for too much. You did everything right. You loved with depth. You stayed honest. You showed up fully. And that made them uncomfortable because you were everything they were pretending to be. Let this be your divine reminder. You are not too emotional. You are not too intense. You are not too sensitive. You are really a world that teaches people to be fake. You are holding a culture that profits from brokenness. And that is not something to apologize for. That is something to protect. The right people, the healed, the honest, the emotionally present, they won't run from your lights. They won't try to dim it. They won't make you feel like a burden for being sincere. Until then, don't shrink. Don't dull your voice. Don't pretend to be less just so someone else can feel more. You were too real for someone who was too afraid to be, and that is not your loss. That is your revelation. Closure doesn't come from the one who hurt you. It comes from within. It comes when you stop looking for justice from the unhealed and instead offer yourself the grace, the compassion, the understanding they never could. One of the hardest truths to accept after being wounded by someone you deeply loved is that you may never get the apology, the explanation, the accountability you deserve. You may never get the moment where they finally see what they did. You may never hear the words, "I'm sorry I was wrong." You didn't deserve that. You wait, you hope, you replay conversations. You imagine 1,000 versions of what you would say. If you just had one more chance to make them understand the damage they caused. But your peace was never meant to depend on their awakening. Your healing began the moment you stopped needing them to get it and started trusting that God got it, that heaven saw what happened, that the weight you carried didn't go unnoticed, and that your tears, your prayers, your truth will not return void. This is the start of your inner healing, not because they changed, but because you did. The thoughts that loop through your mind in the quiet hours, those endless what-ifs, whys, and how could they's only deepen the wound. Because the kind of person who can betray you, hurt you, abandon you, and walk away without looking back is not the kind of person who can offer you closure. Not truly. They don't have the emotional maturity. They don't have this. And most importantly, they don't have the courage to face what they've done because that would require accountability. And accountability would shatter the illusion they live in. Waiting for them to suddenly grow into someone they never were only keeps you tied to their absence. You replayed the pain, trying to make sense of it, as if clarity will undo the damage. But the truth is this: closure is not something they give you. It's something you build piece by piece through acceptance, through grace, through radical, tender self-healing. And yes, at first it feels so unfair. You gave your all. You showed up with an open heart, with honesty, with loyalty, with love, and they walked away like nothing happened. You're left bleeding in silence, while they live as if your existence was just a passing moment. That silence can feel like a punishment, but what you don't see at first is that silence is actually your opportunity, not to chase, not to convince, but to heal without further contamination. Because their presence wasn't bringing you peace, it was keeping you in pain. You were holding on to the hope that they'd transform, that they'd turn around and love you the way you deserved. But transformation doesn't come from waiting. It comes from releasing. You have to stop looking backward in order to move forward. And that's not easy when every fiber of you still aches for answers. Why did they lie? Why did they change? Was any of it even real? But even if they sat down and gave you every explanation in the world, it still wouldn't heal the wound. Because words don't heal, actions do. And if they truly cared, they would have shown it when it mattered most. They didn't. And that, painful as it is your answer. Real closure happens not when they come back, but when you stop waiting for them to. It's the moment you delete the message you'll never send. The moment you stop checking their page. The moment you remind yourself, I deserve peace. Even if they never say sorry. Even if they never admit what they did. Even if they go on like you never existed. Your healing is not dependent on their acknowledgement. It's a slow process. Yes, A quiet, powerful reclaiming of your own energy. It begins with choosing yourself over and over again, with saying, even if I never hear from them again, I will be free. You stop obsessing over the lie and begin to trust your truth. You stop hoping for their change and start stepping into your own. You stop asking why they want more and start remembering why you are enough. And every time you close the door, a little tighter every time you silence the urge to reach out, every time you cry and still choose not to break, you are taking your power back. You are building the closure they never had the capacity to give. You are telling your soul, I see you, I believe you, I will not abandon you like they did. One day, quietly, unexpectedly, you'll wake up and feel lighter. You won't crave an apology. You won't fantasize about a reconciliation. You won't wonder where they are, because your ache will be replaced with wisdom. Your wounds will carry strength, and your silence will hold peace. That is true closure, not a conversation, not a message, not an explanation, but the deep, grounded, knowing that what they couldn't give you, you gave to yourself, and that is how your pain becomes your power. The story no longer centers around how they broke you. It becomes about how you put yourself back together. Your rise is louder than their silence. When someone wounds you deeply, when they leave without looking back, when they act like you never mattered, they expect the silence to crush you. They expect the silence to swallow your voice, your hope, your fight. They assume their indifference will erase the impact of their actions. They believe that if they stay quiet long enough, you'll begin to forget. Forget the pain. Forget the manipulation. Forget how hard you tried to love them. Worse still, they hope that silence will make you turn on yourself, that you'll begin to wonder if it was your fault all along. But what they never counted on was your resilience, because your silence was never surrender. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't defeat. Your silence was sacred space. It was where the healing began. It was the quiet soil where your strength began to root itself. It was the ground zero of your restoration. They may never mention your name again. They may pretend they never knew your heart. They may twist the truth in their mind to keep themselves comfortable. But that doesn't define you. What defines you is what you chose to do after the breaking. You rose even when it hurt, even when your legs were shaking beneath the weight of the pain. Even when it felt like there was no light left inside you. You rose every single morning you got out of bed when it would have been easier to stay numb. That was your rise. Every night you cried and still held on to the tiniest shred of hope. That was your rise. Every time you chose growth over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness, healing over hiding, you were rising. You didn't shout. You didn't post to expose. You didn't seek revenge or public validation. You let their silence echo through the background while you began to rebuild yourself in the stillness. You became your own savior. You forgave yourself for not leaving sooner. You forgave yourself for giving too much. You didn't wait for their apology to believe in your worth again. Their silence gave you something they never could. Space to hear your own voice. A voice that had been drowned out by their gaslighting, their control, their chaos, and in their absence, you began to remember yourself, not the broken version of you that they tried to manipulate, but the whole radiant soul you were always meant to be. They used silence to punish, but it became your sanctuary. They thought silence would keep you small, but it made you expansive. They thought the silence would be your cage, but it became your freedom. You stopped checking for their updates. You stopped wondering if they would come back. You stopped hoping they'd change. You started updating your own soul. You started creating peace from the inside out. You started rebuilding your trust with yourself. And that's the most powerful kind of healing there is. This rise of yours isn't loud. It's not flashy, but it's undeniable. It radiates from your calm. It glows through your joy. It shines in your ability to laugh again, to trust again, to stand tall in your truth. They may have broken you, yes, but they did not destroy you. They may have discarded you, but they didn't define you. You are the one who decides what comes next, and your rise is louder than anything they'll ever say. Because your peace speaks volumes. Your healing is the victory. Your silence turned into power, and your comeback. It's a song only the healed can sing. They left you, but they didn't take the best parts of you. They may have tried to tear you down, but they never had the power to erase the truth of who you are. If anything, through the pain, you uncovered parts of yourself you never even knew existed. You met your strength. You found your voice. You stepped into a version of yourself that was forged in fire, not broken by it. You built resilience from the ashes. You developed deep, intuitive wisdom that only comes from surviving heartbreak. You learned how to set boundaries not from bitterness, but from clarity. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped settling for crumbs when your soul was made for feast. And most importantly, you stopped tolerating anything that made you question your worth. They thought walking away would break you. They thought you'd be stuck in silence, begging for closure, lost in confusion. But they were wrong. Because while they were busy erasing your presence from their life, you were busy remembering who you were. You were busy healing. You were busy transforming. You were becoming. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, they will look at your life and realize something deeply unsettling to them. They never had the power they believed they did. They'll see you smiling. They'll hear about your success, your joy, your glow. And in their quiet moments, they'll feel it. The echo of your name in places their silence can't touch. But you won't be waiting for that moment. You won't be watching from the shadows, hoping they regret it. Because you'll be too busy living, too busy thriving, too busy basking in the peace that came from walking away from what was breaking you. You don't need revenge. You don't need an apology. You don't need validation from someone who never saw your value to begin with. Your growth, that's the victory. Your peace, that's the reward. Your healing, that's the legacy. That's the kind of power that doesn't shout, but echoes in places they'll never be able to reach. It lingers in the truth you now live by. It radiates in the boundaries you now uphold. It sings in the joy that no longer depends on someone else's approval. And even if they never say it, even if they never look back, they'll feel it. They'll feel the absence of your light, your loyalty, your love, because what you gave was real. And what they lost was irreplaceable. So keep rising, keep healing, keep building your future with hands that once carried grief. You don't need your rise to be recognized by the one who broke you. You only need to recognize it for yourself. And when that moment comes, when you can finally say, I no longer need them to validate my story, when you can look in the mirror and see not what they did, but who you became in spite of it, that's when you've truly won. You didn't just rise above them. You rose above every lie they made you believe. You rose above the fear that said you wouldn't make it. You rose above the silence that once suffocated you. You rose not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. Your rise is the answer. Your rise is the redemption. Your rise is the healing. Your rise is the freedom you were always worthy of. And that's a story that doesn't end in pain. It ends in power.